Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing something a little different than what I usually upload on my YouTube channel, and that is a tutorial. Yes, what I usually do on my YouTube channel is upload videos about progress I am making with my Mario Kart game or my other Mario 3 platformer games. But in one of my previous Mario Kart videos, I got a request by someone to make a tutorial on how I implemented the item system. And by the way, if you're curious on how my Mario Kart game looks, just go to my YouTube channel and visit the playlist. You'll see everything there. So today I'm going to do a quick tutorial on how I got my item system to work in my actual Mario Kart game. And as you can see, I have a different scene over here. It's just a demo scene, and the reason I did this is because I already implemented the item system in that, so I don't want to re-implement it. And I also want to show, I don't want to distract you guys from the other things that are going on in the scene because there's a lot of things I'm working on in that project right now. So this project is only meant for the item system. So I hope that keeps it clear to what you guys are looking at right now. So let's get right into it. So I'm going to show you what I'm actually going to be showing in this video. Let me just show it right now before we actually start. Just It's just a simple controller. This cube represents our player, and you can go into these item boxes or this item box, and it does a random scroll thingy until it lands upon an item, and there you go. There's an item, and it spawns here because, well, I'm not using the actual player model, so it doesn't spawn in the player's hand, but let's just say, yeah, it spawns here. So this is what we're using for this tutorial. So that's what we're going to be implementing. I can press right shift to use the item and get another one, and this time maybe it's something random, something else maybe. Oh, come on. Okay, I can tell you it's random. It's just being funny right now, but it is random. So hopefully we get something else this time. Yep, see, we got a bob-omb this time, so if we can use that. And I'm not going to be showing you the code for the actual items when we use them. If you want a tutorial on a certain item, I can show you how. But in this tutorial, we're focusing on how to actually select the items. So let's get started. So to get to the code, we have to go to our player script, which is where all the code is. So let's go. And the code for the actual item box appearing and disappearing is right over here. I'm going to comment these 3 lines out because that's related to the item selection process. So yeah, let's get right into the code for the actual item box. So what we're going to do first, we're going to get the box collider component. Well, first of all, we're going to check if it collided with the item box because if you recall, the item box is, well, not recall, but I never showed you actually. But the item box has a box collider which is set to is trigger. So you can only access collision events through a trigger event. That's why we call this function on trigger enter. And notice how it's an enumerator because we have a yield return new wait per seconds over here. Normally it would be void if this line wasn't in the function, but it is. So what we do, we check if we actually collided with an item box by using the tag, and the tag is item box. So we do, if the tag is item box, then we execute this code. So basically, a summary of this code would be like this upper half kind of like disables the item box, but not literally disables it, but disables some components in it to actually make it look like it got disabled. And after 1 second over here, we re-enable it. And let me show you real quick what happens if we literally disable the item box. I'm not going to show you what happens, but I'm going to show you what the result of this code that we implemented here is. So let's say we duplicate these item boxes, and I think you can see where I'm going with this. When we collect an item box, we want the animation to stay in sync, right? Because if we disable the item box and then we get another one, and then, if we disable the item box and it reappears, the animation won't be in sync with the rest of the item boxes around it. So what we're doing, we're basically turning off all the components inside of the item box, but not the actual rotating animation itself. So we're kind of like, it's kind of like a workaround. So let me go through it. So we disable the box collider, I already told you that. But then what we do, we get the second child object, and then from that object, we get its second child object, and we get the skin mesh renderer in that, and we disable it. So yeah, so the reason there's a 1 over here is because indexes start from 0. So 0 is actually the first item, and 1 is the second item, and so on. So if we actually go through the hierarchy of the actual item box, we can see that get child 1 from the main item box over here. Get child 1, so 0, 1. So this is what we're trying to access. Then we get its second child object. So if we open this up, we get 0, 1. So this is what we're trying to access, and there's a skinned mesh renderer here. So what we're doing is we're disabling it with this line of code. Okay? Oh, sorry, this line of code. Now let's get to this line of code now. So what we want to do now, well, hold on. Let me just tell you that this line of code disables the question mark, because this is actually the question mark over here, as you can see. But now we want to disable the actual box that's rotating around. So what we do, since there's 2 items inside of the box, I didn't feel like writing, well, I mean, it doesn't really matter because it's only 2 items, but you can also just write 2 lines of code. So maybe like, I don't know, this is the same thing as doing this. So for example, let me describe what it does first. So we get the third child object, and then this loop, we get the I variable. We get the, okay, I think I just confused you, but let me explain it again. So we get the third child object of the main item box, then we get the I variable, and the I variable will go from 1 to 2. It will not go to 3 because I has to be less than 3. So it will go from 1 to 2. So we're either getting the second or the third child object. And if we go here, so the third child object of the main is over here, and then we're trying to access these 2 over here, okay? And they both have a skinned mesh renderer on it, so we can disable that in this loop. Now what I was saying, and since there's only 2 items inside the item box, you don't really need a for loop. You can just write 2 lines of code like this. Just, I guess, copy that, put it here, and put it here again. And instead of putting I, we just do 1, and then we put 2. It's the same thing, but you don't need a for loop for that. But I just put a for loop to make it more readable, I guess. I don't know, because this looks kind of confusing. So it's very repetitive. But whatever. So after we disable the box's mesh renderers, the skin mesh render, so as you can see these 2 items over here, we want to go to the animator, which is attached to the item box, and we want to set a boolean inside of it to false. Now let me show you what this animation actually is. So if this is where the animator is attached, and if we go to its animator, there's a boolean over here which is called enlarge. We want to set it to false, and this will control the transition from the default state to its spawn animation, and this is what the spawn animation looks like. So if I click on the actual object and go to its dope sheet, yeah, so it's like a half a second long animation of an item box growing. So basically, when you collect an item box, it just disappears and then it comes back, right? We want to have that effect, like the animation, right? So that's what it is. And here it's just looping. It's not going to be looping in the actual gameplay. So what we do, we set it to false, and these lines of code I commented out because they're related to the item selection process, which I'll get to later. Now, basically over here, we're just undoing what we did over here. So after 1 second of waiting, we re-enable the mesh renderers. We turn on the box collider. We reset all booleans inside the animators, and that's what we're doing over here. So I'm not going to go through that. It's just the opposite of what we did over here. Now, we got that's what gives us the item box disappearing and re-enabling. But now we want to actually get to the process of the item selection. So for that, I'm going to uncomment these out, uncomment these lines. So they're actual lines of code now. And let's get to this function over here, get item. The reason I'm doing start coroutine is because this is an enumerator, which means that it has a yield return new. So in this case, I'm waiting for 4 seconds before the rest of the code executes. That's why it's an enumerator. And if you want to call an enumerator, you have to use a start coroutine and pass in the name of the function over here. So let's get to this. Here it says if you do not have an item. And now has item is a boolean which is set to false initially over here, as you can see. So if we do not already have an item, then we select a new item, because in Mario Kart, if you already have an item and you collide with another item box, nothing will happen. You just keep your old one. So we generate a random number. We'll store it in this variable called index, which is actually a global variable. So index is a random number from 0, because indexes start from 0, to this the length of this array. Now, before I continue on with this code, let me explain what this array is and what this array is. There's actually two arrays: item game objects and item sprites. So, to show you, I'm going to go into the player script in the inspector, and here are the two arrays: item game objects and item sprites. So, item game objects is just a list of game objects that are a child to the player. As you can see over here, we have a list of all these items, and each one is like a specific object. For example, this one is a golden mushroom, maybe this one is a star, and just like that, we store all these items in an array of game objects. So now another array, basically the same thing, but with sprites. So it's in the same order. As you can see, item banana, blue shell. This is just another name for a blue shell in, I guess, Japanese. I'm not sure. Don't judge me on that. Bob-omb, bullet, item killer. That's what the developers of Nintendo called a bullet bill. Coin, whatever. So it's the same order, okay? So the reason we're doing this is because what we're going to do is we're going to select a random item, and to do that, we're going to select a random index, which is from 0 to 9. We're going to select a random number, which will lead us to a random item over here. And with that same number, we're going to get a sprite, which will be displayed as your item that you get in the UI, okay? So, I think if I confuse you, just stay with me, I'll explain it all. So, as you can see, we're getting our index, and then with something called your sprite. So, your sprite is actually a UI image, and we're setting a sprite to the selected sprite in the array I just showed you. So, I know this is confusing, but let me go into the UI and show you what's going on. I'm just going to delete these two item boxes so we don't clutter up everything. So here's the canvas. I'm going to show you the canvas from far. Turn on the gizmo. Oh, it's right here. Okay, it's all the way over here. Okay, so this is a canvas. Now, over here, you can see our scroll wheel over here. And if we go into the canvas, we have this item background. So that's like the main parent object of this whole item UI. So just ignore that. It has two animations. It has one animation for coming into the UI, like into the screen, and one animation for leaving the screen, as you can see. Okay? So what we do is once we start the item process, right? We set a boolean inside this animator over here, which causes this a scroll wheel to pop in the screen, to come in. Okay, so we can see actually what's going on. Then we have a list of sprites. I say a list, okay? It's like a... Actually, hold on. Before I explain this, let me just go into the actual canvas and show you what's going on. So if you go into the child object of this item background, we have an outline. This outline is just the border for the circle, just for visual aesthetics, as you can see. And this background is just a dark, semi-transparent circle, which is a background for the scroll wheel, like that. But that's not the important part. This is the important part, the items. And also there's one more important part. For this tutorial, or for the scroll wheel to work in general, you need a mask, a UI mask on the parent object, okay? So you have your hierarchy like this, and you have a list of sprites over here. As you can see, all these sprites over here. For this, you need a UI mask, okay? If you turn off the UI mask, you can see this huge list of sprites which are used in this scrolling animation. And if we turn this on, then all the sprites that go outside of this circle over here will disappear. You won't be able to see it, okay? So this item list, which has a bunch of sprites in it, has the animation of scrolling, as you can see. Okay, so actually, hold on. Let me just turn off the mask so I can show you what's going on. This is the animation. So it's just going from, it's just scrolling down, okay? And I'm going to leave this mask on for now. But remember we saw something called your sprite over here? Well, we're referencing the exact last sprite object inside this big game object. So as you can see, it's a coin as a default. But what we're doing is, if we go into the player, we're actually referencing this last sprite over here, your item, okay? So that's what this sprite object from the UI, that's what it is, okay? So now, the reason we have this sprite array is because we can select a random sprite from here and assign its image, excuse me, assign its image to this last object over here. I hope I did not confuse you there, but this is your item over here, and all of these are just like for aesthetics for the scroll wheel to make it look like it's randomly choosing an item in a wheel, but in reality, it's just making it look like a random scroll wheel, and you're just putting the selected items sprite in this last image over here, okay? So that's what we're doing in this line of code. Your sprite is equal to item sprites at index, okay? So remember we said we had two arrays. Sorry, that's the wrong window. We have two arrays in the same order. So this one is for game objects and this one's for sprites. We set the index, so it gives us a random sprite in that list, and we assign that to our sprite, which is the last object in that list I showed you. I hope I did not confuse you. Please tell me I did not confuse you. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, okay? Because I'm new to tutorials, and I may not be the best explainer in things like this, okay? So now what we do, we wait for 4 seconds, then we enable the selected game object. Remember all these game objects, not these, okay? If we go into the player, the child object for the player, all these game objects are kind of like to show which one got selected, right, as a game object. So we enable the selected one, okay? So then we also set the boolean has item is true, okay? So that's what happens. So now, after we have this get item function done, we go all the way up to here. If has item, then we're actually able to use the item. So in this update function, once the has item boolean is true, we repeatedly call this use item function. And in this use item function, it's a void, so we can just do it straight up, use item like that. If input.get key down, right shift, so if we press the right shift key, we don't have an item anymore because we're using it, okay? And now we're setting the item in, which is this background over here, item background. Not this background, the child object of it. So here, we set this object's animator enlarged to false. Oh, sorry, not that. Yeah, the item in to false. As you can see, there's two animations on this, right? One for coming into a screen and one for leaving. And this is controlled by this boolean item in. And you can see a triangular animator controller kind of like animation style, or not style, but transition style, because if it's in its new state, which is the default state where you can't see it on the screen, the item in boolean will be called. Then it will be immediately transitioned to the item in animation. And then after that, the only thing it can do is leave, right? The next animation, it has to leave like this, right? So what happens is after we click the right shift key, we set this boolean to false. Then it goes directly to this animation, which I just showed you, which is the item scroll wheel getting out of the screen, and then it automatically goes back to its new state because this has an exit time and there's no condition that needs to be satisfied for it to go back to its new state. And every time we get an item box, this whole process can repeat again. That's why we're going back to this new state over here. So we set that to false. We also set the scroll from the item list, the long list of items for the scrolling animation. We set that boolean to false. And in case I didn't show you already, this has an animator as well. And we're just setting this to false so it can go back to its new state. And we're disabling the object that we enabled to show. Hold on. So if you go back to the player, remember these game objects? The one we enabled, now we have to disable it, right? Because we don't want that to stay active the whole time, right? So after we're done using the item, we pretend we used it, we're done with it, we don't keep it on, so we kind of disable it, okay? So Yeah, that basically gives us the end result of this, the whole item selection process. Oops, oh yeah, I forgot to turn off the mask. So the mask is really important, okay guys, remember that. If you don't have a mask, then this item scroll wheel thing won't look right. So this is the end product, and it selects a random one, bullet bill. So it's basically doing this whole scroll wheel animation, but for the last item in that long list, that's the actual item we're gonna get, and we're just preparing it in the code as soon as we bump into the item box. Okay. So I hope this tutorial made sense. Let me know if in the comments if you have any questions, and if you also have any requests to do tutorials on how the items actually work, then please ask that too. I hope I didn't confuse you all, any of you with this tutorial. So please let me know if you have any questions, and that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching.